In this lesson, we're going to continue to write our story, The Selfish Giant. Now, before this lesson, you should have used your plan and wrote your own sentences all about the beginning of the story using those first two pictures on your plan. In this lesson, we're going to think about the middle of our story. This is usually quite a large part of the story, so it might take a little bit longer than yesterday to write. Let's have a think then. What should happen in the middle of stories? In the beginning, we usually introduce the characters and set the scene. At the end, we usually solve something. So, what happens in the middle? That's right, it's where the problem is. So, let's have a think about our story here. So, in our story, in the middle of our story, it's where the weather is always bad in the garden and the giant never sees anyone. Everywhere is sunny, and the garden is covered in snow and frost, and nothing grows there. You can see that from the pictures in our plan. And the problem in this story is that nothing grows in the garden because the weather is bad all year round. So, back from our plan from yesterday, it's these two pictures here. Okay, so we have the bit about the wooden sign and how the giant wants to scare the children and no one comes to play. And then the next picture about the giant's garden stays cold. It's always winter. There's hail, snow, maybe silver trees. You can put some description in there. Again, I have wrote an example of what a middle part of your story could look like. You don't need to write this on a new page. You just carry on from where you left off yesterday. So make sure you have finished all your sentences and all your points you want to make about the beginning of our story before we move on to the middle. Otherwise, your story won't make much sense. Let's have a look what I wrote. The unkind giant did not want anyone to come into his beautiful garden ever again, so he built a massive fence around it. The fence was made of solid metal, and it was so big that nobody could climb over it. The giant was so mean because he didn't want to share his garden. Spring came and all of the country had lovely sunny weather, but not in this garden. The garden was ice cold and freezing because it was still winter. The winter lasted a whole year, so there were no flowers and the trees didn't blossom. What awful weather it was. The selfish giant did not understand why it was so cold. Then one morning, he was lying in his freezing cold bed and he heard some lovely music. Okay, so I've wrote some sentences just about the middle of my story, talking about how the giant wanted to scare the children and how nobody came to play, and then that it's the garden stays winter forever. There's some extra details I've put in there about the music at the end. That's just something I thought of as I was writing that I thought would link nicely towards the end of my story. So you can add extra bits in. Let's just go through my example and talk about why it's a good version and why it's good. Okay, so you're making sure you've got your capital letters at the start of every sentence. Okay, also if you're saying the word winter, that is a season, so that would have a capital W as well. Make sure those capital letters are lovely and big. I've also got all of my full stops at the end of my sentences. And in this example, I've also got an exclamation mark. Now, year one, we've not done too much work about this just yet, but year two, you will have done a little bit last year and maybe this year about sentence types. So this is a type of exclamation sentence. What awful weather it was. So that's a sentence that either starts with what or how, and you're exclaiming what something's like. So what awful weather it was, or how selfish. Okay, so it's got to start with what or how. Maybe you could have a go at using one of those sentences in your writing today. I've got some adjectives in here as well. So I've said the garden was ice cold and freezing. Okay, and the fence was so big that no one could climb over it. That just adds some description to our story and makes it more exciting for the reader. Have a go at writing the middle of your story. Use your plan to help you. And remember, you can always rewatch the first video of the original story and you can always steal some ideas from there and from my examples too. Good luck, and I'm sure you'll do a fantastic job.